Full disclosure, the voice you are listening to now is artificially generated, brought to you by satisphonic.com. See the link in the description for more details. Older Redditors. What do young people get completely wrong about past decades? Up until video rental stores in the early 80s, at school the next day, every kid was talking about what was on TV the night before, as every single family was watching TV together every single night. With some exceptions, most people watched the same thing as their schoolmates or co-workers, just to be a part of the conversation. There's something very isolating about modern media. You can be into a TV show or YouTube series, and nobody else you know has heard of it. I'm a fan of a YouTube series that's pretty popular and very well regarded amongst its fans, and only one of my friends has heard about it. Edit. For people asking, it's red letter media. It's an exceptional amount of media to consume. In the 90s, you had 3-4 super popular channels and 4-5 low-rated channels. They all showed one show at a time. Now we have a dozen streaming services with infinite media option. It's becoming increasingly difficult to engage in office conversation because so much content is available. People do not have to stray as far from their interest to consume content they want to consume. Must-see TV Thursdays was a slogan, but the truth in the 90s. Friends and Seinfeld were shown on Thursday night, and you had to see it to talk about it in the office the next day. Of course, there was always some rebel nonconformist who would boast about not having a TV and lecture us that it was useless drivel. Probably just how often you had to accept that you couldn't find out the answer to something. If you had a question, you could ask your family, maybe your friends, maybe your teachers, and your last chance was to check the library. But if the library didn't have the answer, then you just had to accept that you weren't going to get an answer, or you'd have to hope to come across that answer someday in the future. Now, you just ask Google and get 10 answers in just a second. Kids used to rely on that for so much fun bullshit. Like that one classmate who always made an outrageous claim allegedly passed to them by some uncle who worked in some exciting industry or field, and you could either believe them or not. You certainly couldn't look up the truth. That's what I miss the most. There will never be another Marilyn Manson removed his ribcage to autofillate ever again. I'm still trying to teach my mom this, but old habits die hard. Mom, you don't have to wonder. You can Google it. Mom, I wonder how many inches are in a kilometer. Guess we'll just never know. How on time you had to be for your favorite shows, because there was little to no chance you'd see that same episode again until they, hopefully, did reruns during summer. I remember waiting anxiously for the nightly news to be over so I could watch my favorite TV show. Commercial breaks were just mad rushes for the bathroom or to the kitchen to get something quick to drink. Hollering through the house to your sibling, that it was incredibly common to just not have pictures of events or other things we see as important now. Not only did we have entire vacations where no pictures were taken, we could go months without a single picture being taken of any member of our family, unless it was particularly notable. A trip to Louis, no pictures. A trip to Disneyland, maybe a picture at the entry gate or one of the souvenir pictures of us with a character. A trip to zoo, no pictures. An average day, forget about it. Frequently, the only pictures taken were at major holidays like Christmas or on someone's birthday. There are so few pictures of me growing up, it's hilarious, compared to my daughter, whose every waking moment seems to have been captured. They understand restaurants had smoking sections and that bars and clubs were filled with cigarette smoke, but I don't think many understood how pervasive smoking was. There were ashtrays and people smoking literally everywhere. Jury boxes had ashtrays in front of every juror. Judge smoked, lawyers smoked, the gallery smoked. You smoked on planes, trains, buses, taxicabs, and all transportation centers. You smoked at the library, the 2 meetings at schools, the town hall, and all city offices. Hell, you could smoke at the courtyard at my high school as a student. You smoked in the elevator and on the escalator, the mall, sports venues, doctors' offices, hospitals, the movies, the plays, opera, concerts, and every other public performance. A non-smoker would come home often smelling like smoke. One was constantly surrounded by smoke. It was insane. You literally made ashtrays as a grade 1 art project. That's how common it was. Aha, I remember giving my dad the ashtray I made as a gift and him proudly using it at his office. That is so sweet. A good dad is worth his weight in gold. A good mum too. So you're saying that, given the opportunity, I should swap my dad for my dad's weight in platinum. I think he's just saying he likes dads more than mums because men generally weigh more. My mom didn't even smoke, but we made one for an art project in school. I think it ended up at my grandma's house until she decided to quit smoking. As I remember it, non-smokers use them as candy dishes. Even the non-smokers often entertain smokers and second-hand smoke in their homes. It was just so everywhere. I remember when my mum must have learnt about second-hand smoke, she went from keeping ashtrays around for when my smoking family members visited to asking them all to only smoke outside. I thought it was weird at the time. Now I'm an adult, I appreciate that she did that for me as a kid. The idea of a smoking section also doesn't do justice to what it was. We're not talking about a separate room in a restaurant or anything like that. The smoking section might just be the left-hand side of the room. There may not even be a barrier, much less separate ventilation systems. On aircraft, the smoking section was partitioned off by a curtain, if you were lucky. It was everywhere and totally unavoidable. Having a smoking and a non-smoking sections in a restaurant is the equivalent of having a pissing and non-pissing sections in a public pool. You're 9 years old. You pull up on a bicycle to your friend's house on Saturday morning. You go inside, and his mom's writing him a note and gives him $1. The note says he has permission to buy his mother a pack of cigarettes. You and your buddy ride down to the convenience store. You hand the note to the owner along with the money, and he hands you a pack of cigarettes and the change, and off you go. Sunday morning, your family goes to Denny's. Inside the lobby, in the waiting area, there's a vending machine at eye level with an elementary age kid which only dispenses packs of cigarettes. They take quarters, and no one gives a second thought to anyone who happens to put 4 quarters into the machine, pulls the knob, and walks off with a pack of Lucky Strikes. Everywhere has ashtrays. McDonald's, the passenger airplane seats, the desks in the community college classroom, the table under the umbrella outside the teacher's lounge at the high school, and every car you buy comes with ashtrays in the doors or seats, and cigarette lighters in the console. McDonald's had those cool, disposable aluminium ashtrays, but the fancy McDonald's had the glass or steel ones that had to be washed. I don't think many understood how pervasive smoking was there. Public buildings that still have yellowed walls from it, especially older courthouses. Mid-40s non-smoker here. It never occurred to me that this is the reason courthouse walls are a weird color. I seriously thought it was a poor paint choice, or paint that didn't hold up well over time. Facepalm. Mid-40s architect here. A lot of paint and coating products will naturally yellow over time. UV damage will fuck up your face and your walls. Latex-based paint applied over smoke-stained oil, based paint applied over smoke-stained oil. Based paint can lead to a situation where walls look like they are oozing nicotine. I remember being a kid in the 70s in the grocery store with my mom and seeing people smoking throughout the store. All these ladies with cigarettes hanging out of their mouths, leaning over the produce. When I was older and worked in a grocery store in the 80s, I would have to sweep up cigarettes that were stubbed out on the floor in the aisles. In the early 80s, my mom would send me to the corner store to buy a pack of smokes for her, and they'd sell them to me, despite the fact that I was child. I remember this in the 90s growing up. My aunt was a waitress, and we'd go in and see her out at her restaurant all the time. We'd sit in the no smoking section, but it'd really just be a few specific tables that didn't have ashtrays in one big open room that was absolutely filled with smoke. This was just like a normal family restaurant, not a dive bar or club or something. And clearly, no one thought much about it. That was a childhood memory I haven't thought about in a while. You saw it at the end of its life. I finished college in 1994, and the place where I worked, like many places, was completely smoke-free. People who worked there told me that they used to smoke while doing drawings, and it wasn't horribly uncommon for people to accidentally burn drawings and have to start over. I was born in 81. My mom said people smoked in the hospital. I moved to Montana from Oregon in 2006 and was blown away. People still smoked inside. I worked in a hotel and the housekeepers smoked in the break room. It was legal to drink and drive. As long as you were not drunk, you could get a drink too. Go and walk to the next bar. Then I moved back to Orr, asked for a 2-go cup for my margarita at a restaurant, and they about called the cops on me. I was like, oops, I forgot lol. It wasn't if you smoked, it was what brand you smoked. A famous, now deceased, lawyer in my state was interviewed about his years of practice. He explained that his dirty trick was to light a big cigar right after he gave his closing argument. Before he came into the courtroom, he'd straighten out a paperclip and put in the middle of the cigar. It would as structural support for the ash. As the other attorney gave his closing, he'd be puffing away, drawing that ash down further and further, leaning back in his seat. About the time that he had an inch or so of ash at the tip of his cigar, the jurors would start watching him, wondering when the ash would break off and fall on his suit. The paperclip would hold it in place, and before long, nobody was really listening to the other side. Did it actually work? I don't know. Did he ever end up looking like an idiot when he ashed all over his tie? No idea. But he could light up a stogie and start puffing away like a madman in a courtroom. There's conversation on Reddit every so often about how young Generation Z looks. Edit, when comparing to photos and footage of teenagers, young adults from previous generation. I believe that a huge factor isn't just clothes, but because it's the first generation that didn't grow up around a ton of second-hand smoke and environmental pollution during their developmental years. As a millennial, even I once sat in a home that smelled of my grandfather's cigarette. And 3 miles away, an oil refinery was once in operation. Less than a mile away from the high school my mom went to. Gen Z also did not lather up in baby oil and go lay in the sun, probably underestimating how few choices there were. Today, it seems like everything imaginable is available in a variety of sizes, delivered to your door overnight. Catalogs and mail order, with 4-6-week delivery malls, were the best thing ever. All the stores in one place, and not downtown. Definitely. And also just how little people knew they were missing out. If it wasn't on network evening television, channels 2, 4, 7, 9, and 11, or on a store shelf in your town, or in the Sunday newspaper, it simply didn't exist for you. If you had an inkling something existed, say tin foil that comes in sheets, instead of one giant roll, you could go around asking people if you wanted. But you were more than likely to just get a shrug and that's it. Why would you want such a thing? Let's say you were particularly enterprising, so you dial 0 and ask the operator for the number for corporate headquarters of Reynolds if you knew the city it was in. Because there was no internet, and the only way to find a number was by dialing 0 and speaking to a telephone operator. But even if you spoke to someone at Reynolds, they had no way to exchange money for goods at that level, and they probably would just tell you they sell it in the Ohio area, and that would be that. You went to the market. They have one brand of pancake mix, and no one had ever heard of anything different. And why would you want a different brand anyway? Then you go to the hardware store, and they carry 2 brands of paint, and no one had ever heard of any other brand of paint. And it was that way for a long, long time. Life definitely seemed more simple back then. Fewer choices meant less decision fatigue. Need pancake mix? Well, there's only that one brand. Take that and go. Paint, 2 brands. Pick one of those and go. Now there's millions of brands and millions of choices to make each and every single day. It's nice, but it's tiring having to do all the research to pick the best one that suits your needs. Then if it's not the right one, you ship it back and restart the search again. We have everything but own nothing. We have subscriptions for anything and everything. Just a few days ago, I saw a post on Wildly Infuriating about a printer having a subscription service, something like 10 pages a month for some absurd amount of money. It was ridiculous. Millions of choices, most of them of poor quality and liable to fall apart. Millions of choices offered by 10 corporations. I often laugh with my wife watching old shows. We'll say we had that table or we had those chairs. There were a grand total of about 3 tables, 5 different wallpapers, 3 types of coffee pot, and 4 different cassette radios. It seems that GVEC one, the silver one, everyone had that. What I love is my priceless family heirlooms, and then I see an old picture or movie and discover that actually everyone had one like that, and it's not at all special. That juice pitcher with the yellow flower. My grandmother smoked basically every second she was awake from age 1375. She loved it and said she would rather die than stop. She smoked in her house and car, even in bed. I used to stay with her a lot. I went to a strict private school for high school. They were on campus, off campus, which meant you had to conduct yourself the same way at home as at school. My parents went out of town for 2 weeks. I had to stay with my grandparents. I was about 15 and knew I smelled like an ashtray. What could I do? I had to stay with her. Even my hair smelled like it. So I'm at school and I get called out of class and sent to the principal. He explained to me that several teachers had complained that I smell like smoke, and he knows I have been smoking before I come to school. I told them I was staying at my grandparents' and my grandmother smoked non-stop, and that's why. They said that was not true because my hair smelled like smoke, and that only happens if you smoke. So they're about to suspend me. They call my parents. My parents had to tell them I was staying with my grandparents, and that's why. I was so embarrassed and self-conscious until my parents got back and I got to go home. Also, when we moved my grandparents to another house, we took down everything from the wall, realized the walls are yellow from smoke, where something had hung the walls were bright white. I often wondered what my grandmother's lungs looked like after this. My grandmother was the same, 2-3 packs per day, minimum. She could stop. She needed several surgeries over the years, and her doctors refused to operate if she was actively smoking. So she would quit, get the care she needed, and then start smoking again the day her sutures were removed or was given the release to. I was given my great-grandmother's fine china that my grandmother had. For decades I thought it was yellow. Because my family was poor, I figured it was just low quality. But when I got it, I washed it all, 5 times. The entire set is white. It was yellow due to all of the tar deposits from my grandmother's smoking, and it was packed into the back of a cabinet that hadn't been opened in years. That's how much a lot of older people smoke. I am definitely an older Redditor, born in 1949. What today's young people don't appreciate is how, growing up, we had to invent our own sources of fun. There were no video games, which I enjoy playing. Just 3 channels on a black and white TV. We didn't get color until 1967, and no real entertainment aimed at kids. All we could do is interact with each other and play established games like marbles, or maybe an organized sport like Little League Baseball. There was a baseball diamond overgrown with weeds across the street from us, but mostly we played in the woods that surrounded us, climbing trees pretending to be pirates or samsa. I loved the bookmobiles that would visit my street, and I must have read every biography, all bound in blue covers, in my elementary school library. It was a different era, with many fewer distractions and much more time for sustained imagination. Being a different place and time, we developed different skills for interacting with the world and each other than young people do today. Was it better? That's hard to say. We tended to have an insular view of our own little world, while today it is hard to escape what is happening everywhere on Earth. We had to wait days for a letter to arrive, and we shared a party line with our neighbor's phone. That is a far slower pace than today's instantaneous texting culture. Yes, I do text. Some things have been lost while others have been gained. That's the way it always will be. Just wait. I love your description of sustained imagination. My son is 4, and last year we moved from the city to 80 acres in a small town, and watching my son's imagination grow and develop just from the stillness is such a beautiful and lovely thing to get to watch. Slowing down and not always being bombarded with activity is such a benefit that I feel most kids these days seem to be missing. Like a lot of them literally don't ever get that opportunity. Kids and adults alike. Boredom is a gift and is necessary for imagination and creativity. I say this as an 18-year-old who grew up with technology. We've all got too much dopamine. Ironically, people would be much happier if our dopamine intake wasn't so high and so frequent. You can't experience the highs without the lows and the unremarkable mediums. This was true even in the 90s in some parts of the world. I was a kid in 80s, 90s, Sri Lanka, and I distinctly remember how hard entertainment was to come by. We had no mobiles or even Cs, not much gaming. There were like 4 national TV channels for the entire country which started broadcasting at like 4 p.m. on weekdays. Certainly nothing like streaming. Sure, we could rent Vs, but those cost money. Things like concerts were mostly seasonal. We had to make up our own entertainment, and playing outside was a huge part of it. How common drinking and driving was. Until MAD came along, people did this routinely. It's where one for the road originated. Yes, when my friends and I had our 18th birthdays in the late 1979s, the thing to do was to celebrate by driving through Beer Barn, where you could literally drive through to get beer, wine, coolers, whatever. Then open them up and drive while drinking. At 18. This was in Texas. It also was not uncommon for my dad to drive while drinking when he was taking us wherever at night. Zero education on why you should not do that. I own a mid-80s era car, and it proudly boasted that they had gotten rid of cup holders to help curb drunk driving. Pontiac couldn't imagine any other beverage in a cup. A lot of people sound like they think we lived in silent bubbles because we didn't have smartphones and computers weren't common. On the contrary, we talked a lot. If you had questions, you talked. Then you went to the library, and then you talked some more, and wrote letters, and passed notes like crazy. The chatter never fucking stopped. People would scold women for gossiping and make jokes about it, but the men were just the same. Everyone is like kids these days, have no privacy, but you couldn't kiss your boyfriend on the street without hearing about it from every fucking rando in the neighborhood. Entertainment budgets were also a lot lower. People passed the time by doing something like listening to the radio with friends. That was an activity. 1 million streaming services and replacing multiple fancy devices every few years wasn't really a thing because the money got blown on essentials. And those essentials, while quality, weren't cheap, and not many jobs paid well. You could afford an apartment, but you wouldn't be doing much else at all but conversing with friends in person. I remember that I somewhere read that a common hobby in the 50s was looking outside through a window. A lot of people sound like they think we lived in silent bubbles because we didn't have smartphones and computers weren't common. I literally had this happen at work yesterday, where my younger co-workers were saying, in effect, Israel, who knew all this was going on. And people wouldn't have known without social media. Believe me, we knew. Landline telephones had seriously great audio quality. Better than anything for remote conversation today, in my opinion. I distinctly remember being a teenager and just talking on the phone with someone late into the night, hearing them breathe and sigh, hearing them breathe and sigh, hearing their every little sound. There wasn't the lag and the noise cancelling and the high compression that ruins telephony today. It was a much purer way to feel like you were closer to someone than anything we have today. Honestly, it's shocking how poor the mic quality is on even high-end modern smartphones. We had so much better on landline phones as a rule. The problem is not mic quality, it is wirelessness. Audio does not do well with the type of compression needed for wirelessness. Digital audio can sound amazing, as good as analog if lossless, but lossless requires bandwidth and signal stability, and wires are just superior at that. A lot of people sound like they think we lived in silent bubbles because we didn't have smartphones and computers weren't common. I literally had this happen at work yesterday, where my younger co-workers were saying, in effect, Israel, who knew all this was going on. And people wouldn't have known without social media. Believe me, we knew. How hard it was to get porn. You had to go buy it in person. Mail order porn was a possibility, but then the postman knows. They always knew. When I was about 11, 12, our crew were riding our bikes out of the neighborhood and found a paper grocery bag full of old Playboys by the side of the main road. Thought we hit the lottery for a bunch of pubescent boys. We hid them in the woods until they finally fell apart. Bags full of porn found in the woods were a big part of my formative years. Found caches on more occasions than I can count, sometimes well preserved and high quality, sometimes exposed to the elements and weathered to the point you just throw it back in the woods. People say that the 80s were all about consumerism, which is true, but the products were well made and fixable. Towns had repair shops for everything. You just didn't buy a disposable TV. If it broke, you took it in to get fixed. Nowadays, if your TV breaks, it's tossed and you get a new one. Edit. TVs are just one example that I used. Look at many different examples under the comments see shoes, household appliances, cars, etc. Yep. Working in computer repair, computer and phone companies, realized they'd make more money if they made it as difficult as possible to fix. But people started realizing that so we're fighting the right to repair fight. The 80s was not day-glow. The 80s was brown and grey with a dash of pastel towards the end. Early 80s still had brown around yellow fashion. From the late 70s then pastels took over. So much brown. My first apartment in the 90s was decorated in the 80s, so I had mauve carpeting and mauve flame-stitch wallpaper in the hallway. So many kitchens in country blue, with freaking ducks everywhere, especially on the wallpaper border. Wallpaper borders were a curse. The 90s, on the other hand, maybe not everyone's experience, but for me there was casual violence everywhere. Smacking kids was not only tolerated but expected. Hit by parents, friends, parents, random adults in the neighborhood, teachers, etc. Then you'd get beat for making the teacher hit you. What will the neighbors think was real? Yes, our parents were very concerned about what others thought and keeping up with the Joneses. Travel, reading paper maps and scanning for roadsides and landmarks to guide you to destinations you have never been to. Half of my younger co-workers couldn't point north if asked without their phone. 911. Younger people don't truly understand how the entire nation froze in shock. Security was never the same. For example, traveling via air was never the same afterwards. I miss the days of walking my friend's family to the gate and drop them off. They don't understand that essentially nothing has been the same since, and everything this country is going through right now can in some way trace a through line directly back to the effects that 911 had. 911 was such a shock to the country. I can't speak for older generations, but I imagine it was kinda like the Jake assassin. Everything just stood still, and then America adjusted course and went down a path. The COVID lockdowns are probably that event for younger people than I, but 911 was the first time as a millennial that I knew that the world had changed in a fundamental way. My mom called it my generation's JFK moment. Everyone of age remembers where they were and what they were doing at the time. 911 feels like yesterday. In 1962, I was in 4th grade. I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis and the fear in adults' voices. I have a vague memory of going outside at night with my grandparents to see if we could see Sputnik up in the sky. Kids think things weren't as simple as they see on TV. They were, for better and for worse. Mom drove up to a service station, and when the car rolled over the small hoses on the ground, the bell went off, ding ding. A young man in overalls came running out and began filling the tank, then checked the oil, washed the windows, checked the tire pressure, all before the tank was full. Then he'd complete the cash transaction, and off he went. The world stopped at the edge of your town. If you knew someone far away, you wrote letters with a postage stamp. Most people had telephones, but answering machines didn't come around for a long time. And if someone moved without leaving a forwarding address, or didn't tell you, they stopped existing. There was just no way to find them. I'm going to the store. When will I be back? When I get back. What if you need me? I don't know what to say. Yes, I have the quarter in my pocket for a phone booth in case something happens. If the car broke down, you just walked until you found a phone booth or sat on the side of the road until someone stopped to help. Service stations all carried paper maps, but you had to talk to people too. They'd say things like, well, the last fuel for 200 miles is up yonder, so if you keep driving, you'd best make sure you got a full tank before you head out. If you had a bike, the world was your oyster on Saturdays, whether you liked it or not. The last cartoon stopped at 9:30 am, and then you weren't allowed in the house until dinner. Riding with friends to the railroad tracks because you found a penny and you could put it on the tracks when a train came, and then pick up the smashed penny and keep it. And then you find a quarter in the dirt and it's off to the corner market because they sell capped. You can't afford a cap gun, but you can find 2 rocks and you can smash caps for an hour or two. You have to pee, find a grass field or the side of a warehouse because you're not allowed home until dinner. You're hungry? There's usually a blackberry bush or a crabapple tree you can swipe something from and then wash off any bird poop in a creek. You're thirsty? Lots of houses have garden hoses out front. Don't get caught or be faster on your bike than the person can run. Paper checks were another one. There weren't atoms, so you got a paper check and had to go to the bank during banking hours. And you could withdraw money, and you could withdraw money, and you could write a check. But if the place you wanted to go didn't take checks like a movie theater and you didn't have cash, you just didn't get to go. You had to wait until the bank opened Monday morning. Kids think E-Took was a joke, but the panic was real. People legit thought computers would end us. Looking back more than 2 decades, it feels like E-Took was a whole lot of fuss over nothing, but that's because there were so many people working behind the scenes to fix things in the months and years leading up to it that did take it very seriously. At the time, my dad worked as a computer programmer for a fairly large bank, and his whole department had been focusing for almost 2 years, knowing that there were lots of little things that could have ended up disastrously wrong. They did numerous offline drills with backups of the bank's data in the weeks leading up to it, and were fairly confident that they had patched and updated all of the code, but my dad and his department all had to come into the office on New Year's Eve to be ready to fix things if something unexpected broke. Fortunately, everything worked as planned, and the evening basically turned into a catered party for him and the other programmers. One of my professors said that some programmers made an absolute killing the years prior to E-Took. After seeing everyone freaking out over toilet paper just a few years ago, I would bet the kids find it too believable. There was actually a kids' book released in 1999 centered around the iTalk bug causing a run on toilet paper. The protagonist was a dog that used chat rooms. Was it called I29? We spent almost $1 trillion fixing iTalk bugs. It worked, and now everyone thinks it was no big deal. The 80s was not colorful. It was brown and burnt orange as far as the eye could see. Early 90s was the colorful time. Goths today have no idea how easy they have it. We had to raid our grandma's closet, go to thrift stores, and learn to sew and alter them. I also don't think people know just how important safety pins were as an accessory. We had at least 5 in every pair of pants. We also pierced ourselves with them. Early, mid-90s, I never knew there were piercing shops. At 40, I still have my nose piercing. I did with a safety pin in 8th grade. In jaw high, I colored my fingernails black with a sharp-eye BC black nail polish. Was not really a thing you could buy. Colored hair dye? Colored hair dye? Nope, we had Kool-Aid. Aging punk rocker here. We used to have to sew our jeans into skinny jeans and cut our own hair because there was no salon that would even come close to understanding or being willing to attempt to create the haircuts we wanted. And, yep, had to wait until Halloween for black nail polish, and even then, it was shitty costume makeup quality. And if you wanted a certain band shirt, or a cool band patch or something, you screen printed your own. It really was an awesome time. The creativity and ingenuity you had to show to look how you wanted was really fun. How pop culture amalgamates shit into one big blob, when in reality it pisses out in little dribbles over decades until it's distilled by time. Lots of young folks in movie subreddits will talk shit about older movies when they finally watch them and complain that it's not even that good. Why did anyone like it? And they have legitimately zero understanding that at the time that was the only movie about X or Y that anyone had seen, ever, and so yeah, it actually was pretty fucking exciting. Also, how rare it was to be able to watch media like TV or movies repeatedly. It just wasn't a thing. You missed a show? Too bad. Good luck catching a rerun at some point later. Really liked a movie? Well, it's out of theaters, so you can't watch it again until maybe it gets edited and played on TV. So many people just didn't have these. So many people just didn't have these. The way we consumed entertainment 100% does not exist anymore, and it really did inform how we interacted with it. I think younger people don't fully grasp what older generations mean when we say our parents had no idea what we were doing and really didn't care. I see so many young folks angry about their parents not helping with grandkids or going no contact with their parents, and they don't grasp that many boomers and Gen X's raised themselves. Dinner was provided and basic needs were met, shelter, clothing, yearly medical physicals, but so little of everything else. I'm a Gen X, and so many of my friends are only now realizing how bad life was for some of our boomer parents as they are suffering from dementia and their sexual and physical assaults are coming to light. My friends and I left the house on our bikes on Saturday morning, rode all over town, played by the river, grabbed lunch at whatever kid's house we were at, and went back out again. We landed at home for dinner, and then went back out until the streetlight came on. I don't think people today realize the lack of organized entertainment and lack of any electronics. We had almost endless freedom. It was wonderful. I don't think people realize that this is extremely important in growth and development, and many millennials and younger were raised without being allowed to do this. Many millennials grew up in the 90s. We still did this. I think you'd be thinking of more recent generations. I am a millennial. Myself and everyone I knew grew up this way. The internet, cell phones, and the like weren't really a thing before I was 10 years old. We lived outside playing as kids until the streetlights came on. We had video games and stuff, but it was far less common to be able to take over the TV from parents. You had maybe 1 or 2 TVs if you were lucky. That all 80s and 90s music was good. There was plenty of crappy music released then. Like there is now, it's just that the crappy music got buried quickly, while the best hits continue to get played today. Survivorship bias. Aki Breaky Heart was bigger than Nirvana ever was. Nirvana's highest charting hit only hit number 6, and lots of bands from that era that are still well regarded like Alice in Chains, 9 Inch Nails, Soundgarden, Rage Against the Machine, Audioslave, Radiohead, and the Smashing Pumpkins never hit the top 10. That's because rock music at the time did great on the album chart, but terrible on the singles chart. By some definitions, not only is Pearl Jam a one-hit wonder, but their one hit is Last Kiss. That feminism isn't some moldy concept from the distant past. In the US, sexual discrimination in education wasn't outlawed until 1972, which just happened to be the same year unmarried women were legally allowed access to birth control. Additionally, prior to 1974, women were not allowed to have credit cards or loans in their own names. They were simply authorized users of their husband's credit cards. Some employers also required married women to have their husband's permission before they were offered employment. When people talk about how women in the 1950s and 1960s stayed married even when the marriage was clearly rocky, it was less about devotion and more to do with the lack of equal access to education, work, and finances. The divorce rate skyrocketed in the 70s, but not because women were suddenly wanton and looking for a good time. It was because they were no longer forced to remain in a bad marriage as a matter of financial survival. I have a co-worker who has worked for my department since the late 70s. She was telling me about how unfair the pay in the office was. She and a man started in the office around the same time, doing the same work, and he started out making 20% more than her, despite having very similar work history and skill sets. A year later, he got married and got a raise. She asked her boss about why she didn't get a raise when she got married, and was told she didn't have a wife at home she needed to support. A couple years later, when he had a baby, he got another big raise. She was told she was lucky to still have her job at all after taking a few weeks off to recover from giving birth. Everyone my age had a story to tell of their mothers in the 60s being told, "Come back with your husband," when they wanted to buy something expensive. My father still gets very angry when recounting how, at the Big Ten university he worked at, they refused to let the women swimmers practice on campus after Title X was created, thus allowing the creation of the women's swim team. For the record, Dad had nothing to do with the swim team or athletics. He just couldn't believe the sexism. Journalism has changed. You used to be able to trust in the integrity of the journalist. Now, they're interchangeable, and all we know is the network. It has changed the way we trust the new media, and it's not good. We shouldn't underestimate the danger of this change. The internet used to be cool. Now it's a fucking cesspool of literal bullshit. The other day, I saw a comment on another thread where an older redditor said that they remembered X thing that was in the news back when they were around 4 years old, and some younger guy very authoritatively told them that you can't remember anything from before your preteens, except for a few core memories unless you were directly involved in the events. This comment got a fair amount of upvotes from what I assume are younger people who don't realize previous generations like mine didn't grow up with smartphones, tablets, the internet, a million channels on TV, etc. So yes, we actually were aware of a lot of stuff that was happening in the world, including the major events in the news, regardless of whether we were old enough to understand what they meant, and we remember a ton of things from our actual lives. Why wouldn't we? I mean, we didn't have an avalanche of content to keep us distracted, no video games that lasted hundreds of hours, no TV on demand, just a handful of channels that went offline during the night and didn't exactly broadcast interesting stuff all day, etc. Claiming everything before your preteens is mostly a fog of vague emotions, and you can only remember, say, the fall of the Berlin Wall or the explosion of the Challenger if you were directly involved, is a very weird take, emo, given how much I remember very clearly from my childhood, including a lot of the important news stories of the day. I don't know if the kid who said that is expressing a popular opinion among younger people that honestly reflects their experience, but I did find the claim really weird, and also found weird that it got several upvotes. Some younger guy very authoritatively told them that you can't remember anything from before your preteens except for a few core memories, unless you were directly involved in the events. That's just ridiculous. Different people have different levels of memory from earlier in their lives, but the idea that only core memories, which I believe is mostly a concept from the movie Inside Out, remain is absurd. One thing that's very annoying is when people take some kind of, often half-understood, psychological research and then apply it to every person and every situation. The brain doesn't fully mature until 25 thing is another example. They believe that you could support a family on minimum wage. I was working minimum wage in the early 1970s, and it was nowhere near enough to live on my own, much less have a house and a family. That is bizarre. I'm going to assume that person doesn't speak for all in that age group. The judge, the things that we do out of context and don't understand what we mean when we say that's the way things were back then. I grew up hearing stories of my uncles driving home drunk from the bar, and they were always told in a funny context. Then we started to realize as society that this was a real problem and worked to change that habit, or at least make people understand it's a bad idea. Not once did I ever look back at my uncles and think they're assholes for driving home drunk. It was just the way things were back then. I recently heard someone mention how domestic abuse, or just smacking a woman around, was so common in old shows and movies. Think about men slapping hysterical women or one of these days, Alice. A lot of young adults seem to think past generations didn't struggle. That's a great example. There is exponentially more public awareness around domestic violence, and how bad it really is that a joke like that today just wouldn't work. People have forgotten just how shit the economy was in the 80s and 90s until 1996 or so, when the e-com boom was starting. They also forget just how awful 2002 was.